My name is Denny Blackburn. I was naming my age. My age will change in about 3 weeks or so. I'll be 94. And I was born in a little town of Cherokee, Kansas, down close to the junction of the borders of Missouri and Oklahoma and Arkansas, down in that corner. We currently live in Cocoa Beach, Florida. My crew and I, we always flew together. This is the way it worked out. We were an assigned crew. And I was a bombardier, and the purpose of the crew of the aircraft was to get me and the bomb load over the target area so I could bomb. And we flew over to, we were on our own air base. There were bases all over England. And 391st was located in one location, and 322nd in another, and a few things like that too. So we flew over to 391st, and they had no idea why we were there. And we kind of guessed what it was, because we knew it was coming. But they had us just go lie down on a bare cot, something wherever you could find, and get some rest. And so early in the morning, real early in the morning, the operations called us again and said, prepare to go down to the operations office for briefing, for a mission. They still didn't tell us what it was, where it was, or what we were going to do, although most of us knew what it would be. And we were all excited and a little nervous about it, a high tense thing. Well, we found out that this was D-Day, June the 6th. And we were to go over and support the invasion of the continent. And they anticipated a tremendous effort because the canal, the water between England and the continent, France, was full of combat boats, American and British. You could walk across on them. Everything was a tremendous operation. Well, the time we finished briefing, we were all pretty well relaxed by then. We knew what it was, just like any other bomb mission that we'd been on before, although we knew it was going to be very severe this time. But we were kind of anxious to see what it was going to look like on the water. Well, we flew the airplane up through the overcast by ourselves and waited to rendezvous with the 391st. My job was to fly lead ship into the group's aircraft. They had a box of 15 airplanes, and I was to be the lead in that. And they flew off our wing and tail in formation. The idea is that they would open their bomb bay doors when they saw mine open, and we had 2,000-pound bombs loaded on a rack as signals for the following people to trigger. Just, you could salvo your bombs easily, you know. And actually, we had about a 30-foot big ribbon tied to each bomb, so they'd be sure they see that come out of the airplane. And, well, anyway, the weather closed in real bad after we got up above the overcast, and the 391st couldn't get through with the formation. You couldn't fly a formation tucked wing into wing like that, where you couldn't see, where you couldn't even tell what altitude was like, you know, except for instruments. And so they aborted. And they went back home, back to their base. They did call and tell us they were aborting. That meant that we were sitting up there by ourselves. And if we had crossed over the water into the channel and turned around and come back, we would have been shot at. Any airplane coming from the east was to be destroyed. We had to go through the routine and on the prescribed route and get back at a specific point. Well, I called the pilot and the crew on the intercom and told them we had a job to do. We were detailed to knock out a Coast Artillery gun battery, and I said we should go in and try to bomb it. But this is a volunteer thing. We go in voluntarily or we don't. And I would like to know what the crew would like to do. And so they all answered back, well, let's go in. And now, remember, we were young. I was, 21 by then, I guess. And inexperienced, really, in life at all. We were untouchable. Nothing could hurt us. Almost nothing. So we decided to go on in, and at least my bombs my signal bombs would hit the target. Well, it was a foolish thing to do, and I realized that after it was all over with. If it had been any other kind of a mission, I would have gone back too. But this was an unusual circumstance, I thought, and the crew agreed with me. And so we went in alone. And sitting up front, you get a real perspective of what's ahead of you and below you. And I went in, the time we got over the water, over the channel, the clouds disappeared, which is a great thing that we didn't like. Flying blind, to have it suddenly appear, because everybody could see us too and could shoot at us if they wanted to. And so anyhow, it made a wonderful perspective for me, because I could see thousands of these ships out there. I didn't really realize what that number meant. You actually could have walked across one from the other, landing craft and battleships and cruisers and all kinds of ships out there. Well, there was a tremendous bombardment from the Navy onto the coast, but there's nothing like being right on top of it and hit the target. And I could see my bombs when I dropped the bombs finally at 5:17 and a quarter. They hit the target, and they did hit. They were good. It was a good bomb run, and I saw them hit. Now I couldn't tell what damage might have been done, but anyway. Then we had to get out of there. It meant we had to take off and fly the prescribed course over the continent, over France, and out of Cherbourg Peninsula to come off back to England. The weather closed in again, and we started icing up, which is terrible to happen in an airplane like that. And ice became so thick, at least a quarter inch of ice on the wings and on my nose of the ship. I had a .50 caliber machine gun in the nose that I could use, but it was frozen in a position in a ball socket, it had frozen up, and the muzzle of the machine gun was frozen, and I'm sure it was ice halfway up the barrel. I couldn't have fired it for anything. It would have exploded in the face. It would have. So anyway, we started back home and got jumped twice by fighters, but we took advantage of the overcast as we climbed up just a little bit. We couldn't go very fast because, we could have to put it in what we call a high blower, put it in a compressor, air input, and that would require more fuel, and we had very little fuel left, just enough to get back home, back to England. So we stayed on the lower level and just flew in the overcast until we broke out over England. And we came down at another air base, the first one we could get to, and landed there. And that was our extent of our action on D-Day. It was a darn foolish thing to do, and I realized it in my old years. It was stupid, but we all were. You know, we were young men, and we could withstand anything in those days then. And we had a job to do, we thought. So, well, anyhow, we survived D-Day. At Weimar, and we were just outside of Weimar, there was a Buchenwald concentration camp. And I wanted to see what it was like. I'd heard a lot about all of them, but I'd never seen one of them before. So I and a couple of my controller men went with me, and we went to Buchenwald, and the scent was terrible. You could smell it from miles away. And we went into the gate, which was open by this time. This was about 2 or 3 days after the Germans had evacuated and left the thing wide open. Didn't do anything for the people that were in there. Most of them were just living skeletons anyway. And we talked to the people that were in there. Many of us saw all of the type of bunking material they had, just boards on tiers, and no bedding whatsoever, really. They were actually looked like living skeletons. They were starved. And outside the barracks area, if you could call it that, there were, well, near the cremation ovens, in fact, there were piles of bodies stacked like cordwood out there, ready to go into the crematory ovens. I took pictures of those too. And I've heard many people say that this was a frame-up that didn't exist, and it certainly did. You better believe. So I talked to a bunch of the inmates. Some of them were very, very alert and like, but they were still starving. And one of them was an attorney who had been, I don't know what his background was, but he did something the Germans didn't like. And he said, it's marvelous. He said, you Americans have made another life for us. He said, we have all the food we could eat. And it was a gruel that the Americans had made up, probably oatmeal and whatever else, cornmeal or something, and it just cooked into a thick mush, like consistency. And they thought it was marvelous. They had hot food and plenty of it. And I wouldn't have touched that for anything. It was horrible, I thought. They thought it was good. So that was something that impressed me dramatically. I enjoyed Denver very much. I had a uniform in Denver, and I was kind of proud to have a uniform on. Well, this was before there was such a thing as a USO that was formed and organized. But there were a lot of servicemen in Denver that had nothing to do on a weekend when there was no operating on the job. So the good ladies of Denver rented an empty office or store building downtown in Denver and turned it into a serviceman center. Had a dance floor, they had a jukebox, and they had coffee and sandwiches and Coke and no hard liquor of any kind, no beer, no nothing like that. And they had coffee, of course, to go with donuts and the likes. And they had young ladies in there who were 18 years old and older. They had to be that age to serve as hostesses, to keep the guys entertained and keep them coming in. Well, part of my training was to go around town in Denver and take photographs. And then on Sunday usually. And then I would take them back on Monday and process them, and then have an interview with my instructors to critique them, tell me where I did wrong or how I could improve it. It was quite beneficial. But I met a woman there who was back in the kitchen making the coffee. And I like coffee, and I like sandwiches and donuts and the likes, you know. And so I went back in the kitchen and wandered back there and got acquainted with all the old women. They were all 45 or so, you know. Well, I was only 20 years old, just a kid. But there was this one that was very nice to me, and she treated me like a human being. And so I got acquainted with her very much. And turns out she had a daughter who was only 16 at the time. She wasn't old enough to be a hostess. And so this woman turned out to be my mother-in-law later on, of course. That's how I met her. So she went home one Sunday afternoon after it was all over with, and told Lorraine that, she said to me later, she said, I met the nicest young man that you really ought to come down and see. Point is, I was set up. I didn't really realize it at the time, you know. I was kind of pleased about it, because when I first saw her, I went in on Sunday afternoon, and I saw this chick over the corner over there, bent over a big steel tub, scrubbing pots and pans, and it was hot. It was in summertime. And even in Denver, it's hot in the summertime. You know. So here she was, bedraggled and hair streaming down, and perspiration and all, in the worst environment possible. How domestic can you get? So I got acquainted with her. I went over and talked to her, got acquainted with her. And although I couldn't take her out on the dance floor because she was not allowed to do that, her mother had contrived to get her to come down there as a helper for her in the kitchen, you see. Well, that didn't satisfy me. So I took her on a date. I arranged to have a date with her on a Sunday morning one day. And we went to... We didn't go to the theater first, did we? Okay, we went to the theater anyway afterwards. And when we came out, everybody was roaming around the street shouting and yelling, hooray, hooray, hooray. The Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And stupid me, I didn't know where Pearl Harbor was. It didn't mean anything to me. And so they had put an order out that everybody, all the military people got to return to the post immediately. But I thought, this is silly. They just didn't know what to do, but they had to do something, the commanders. So I didn't hear them, you know, I was in the theater. That was my excuse. So I stayed out and had a date with her and had a good time. And of course it meant that war was coming, and we knew it. We did have one date in Denver before I got appointed. I took her to the Rainbow Ballroom, and I think it's still in place in Denver on South Broadway. And I took her to that ballroom, and we had spent the whole evening there at the Rainbow Ballroom. She was 17 then, I guess, something like that. She's still a cute little chick, you know. And anyway, we shut the ballroom down. They closed at 12 o'clock or so, around midnight. And when we went outside, it was snowing. And the streetcars had stopped because they shut down at 12 o'clock, you know, rolled up the sidewalks about that time in Denver. It was just a little cow town. About had 400,000 or so people, not very many at the time. And so we had to walk in the snow, and here she was in her dancing shoes, slippers, walking in the snow. And I think as I told her later on, we both floated over the viaduct over the railroads up in the North Denver where she lived, rather than walking. I guess we did. As we felt pretty good about each other at that time. And I walked her home, took her to the door to say goodnight to her, so I had to go back to the base. I said goodnight to her, and somehow or other, I reached in my, when I was about 5 or 6 blocks away, I reached in my overcoat pocket and found something of hers. She says a lipstick. I thought it was a glove or something like it, but it doesn't matter. It was something of hers. And so I turned around, walked back to her, and I knocked on the door and so on. She opened it immediately. She was standing there waiting for me. She had stuck that lipstick in my pocket, and I didn't know about it. And so she knew I was going to return. So we stood out there a little while longer. That was the first time I kissed her. And anyhow, we both floated away. I walked on back to the bus stop to get out to Lowry. So everything was fine.